better than the Apple earbuds. Okay, great. We'll go with this then. Sorry about that. We'll have a mic next time. We'll troubleshoot that. So just kind of backing up, just talking about why Alteryx Designer. Designer being the flagship product, Server being the product that allows us to deploy workflows and allows us to share workflows with colleagues that maybe don't have Alteryx Designer so that they can run it themselves via the gallery. There's also Alteryx Connect, which is going to be your metadata management, your data discovery tool. And then the last product in the Alteryx platform suite is going to be that Alteryx Promote, which is going to be how you deploy predictive or prescriptive models at your company. Today, we're just going to focus on Alteryx Designer. And what is Alteryx Designer? Alteryx Designer is a tool in your data stack, in your self-service analytics data stack, that allows you to create repeatable workflows. So if you think about month-end processes, quarter-end processes, those type of activities, this is going to be a really good tool for anyone that struggles with that or spends too much time on that every single month. Those are the kind of activities that are preventing you from doing maybe the more advanced analytics that you are hoping for, that you graduated in, that you took a job for. Those kind of activities, those real value add activities that are being taken up based on these non-repeatable activities. Also, what is it? It's a code-free way for people to interact with their data. So a lot of people, either like me, find their way into data via Excel, via pivot tables, via VB, or even maybe just straight up some SQL or something. So a code-free way is a really nice low barrier to entry to people that know what they want to automate. They're just not sure from a programming background and skill set maybe how to do that, but they know what the end product is of their data structure. So Alteryx offers the opportunity to introduce drag and drop tools in a self-service analytics fashion that allows people to get to that end result without knowing a bunch of Python, without knowing tons of SQL, without knowing R, that type of thing. What else can it do? So it's pretty flexible and diverse. If you talk about the palette, which we'll go into here when we pull up Designer, in terms of data preparation options, there are prescriptive and predictive options that you can use if you download the R package and now Python supplementary tools. There's a lot of GIS, so a lot of spatial analysis that you can do in Alteryx. Alteryx being actually a company that has its roots in spatial analysis, so there's a lot of geospatial options that you can work through, and we'll maybe go over a couple of those fun examples towards the end. And then what else is it? It's something that you can scale and that you can govern. So when deployed correctly, and when you have Alteryx as a self-service analytics option at your company, it really empowers the business to accelerate a lot of prototyping, a lot of month-end processing, a lot of stuff that they wouldn't normally be able to do because they'd instead be maybe waiting on data engineering to backfill a position and to backfill some work and to get through that backlog that we all know is super long at companies right now for data product delivery. So it's a good way to augment that work, and it's a good way for a lot of people to add a lot of value quickly, just at their own seat without knowing too much code. On the flip side of that, you see there's a code-free and also a code-friendly side to Alteryx Designer. So those people that actually do know Python, R, predictive models, maybe more advanced preparation coding like regular expressions or regex, those people are actually also still able to use Alteryx in a way that allows them to scale their data products that maybe have only been sitting locally. So think about something that someone maybe creatively created a Python script that they know could change how the business is run at their company. If they're not able to explain that to somebody or to deploy it to a couple of colleagues because the concepts that they have are a little too out of reach, Alteryx is a good way to package these scripts up using, for example, the Python SDK. If someone can pass through input data through a tool that they've created in Alteryx using the Python SDK and actually get to an output like a Tableau dashboard or an Excel report or some other output that someone can understand, these kind of Python scripts, these code-friendly paths are a lot more scalable, and they get a lot more eyes on them at companies. So it's a good route for that as well. So with that, I just basically want to give you a little background, but I do want to dive into the tool because that's what we're all here to do. So hopefully you can see my screen up here towards the top. I'm guessing you probably have visited this page. This is just on our data coach page here. And if you haven't yet, what we're going to go through here is actually the installation process. So if you have installed Alteryx Designer, apologies. You can maybe take 15 minutes to yourself or something like that. We are going to run through that process just to make sure when we do get to the practice section, our practice part of our day here, that everyone can follow along and everyone can work through these practice problems, okay? So with that, I am going to check the audio here, and I'm going to keep talking loudly so that people can hear me. Okay, if you have been to this page, I'm guessing you have, since you found this video. What you can do is if you need Alteryx and you don't have it yet, you can download this free trial, okay? I'm going to click on the United States to get to, or to get re-navigated to a certain page here. So if you click on that, it'll take you to this Alteryx.com. There's going to be a couple things that you want to fill out here. It is a free trial, so I think we're paying for it with a little bit of information here. But basically, I can say I agree to get started, and then you can go ahead and press get started. You might have a couple more fields to fill out there, but basically what this is going to do is it's going to enable you to have Alteryx Designer for 30 days, for a month trial version. So once that's downloaded, you'll see down here, it says this type of file can harm your computer. Alteryx has never harmed my computer, so I think I can trust them. Now I'm just going to go ahead and click keep. So that'll download hopefully pretty quickly there. We'll give it a little bit of time here just for everyone to catch up if you're following along at home. While that downloads for some other people, what I'll do here on my side is I'll launch it. It's an executable file. And we'll run through some of the options here. So Alteryx as a tool, as a lot of people know, have a lot of data preparation steps. It has a lot of geospatial analysis. There's also the option to have the R-based predictive tools also installed when you first install it, okay? So if your trial period is extended, what you can do within the next couple minutes, by the way, it's probably nothing too quick. If you have a colleague or something that you'd like to use, in tandem, maybe train with them and use a different email, that could work. Otherwise, you can always reach out to the person who maybe reached out to you in the first place with your first trial and say if you can get an extension, for a couple weeks. It may say can I get another 14 days or something. Say you're going through some new Alteryx Essentials training, and they might work with you on that. So with this, right here, I'm going to just download the typical package, okay? So I'm not going to download predictive tools. We're not going to go into that exercise today, but it is very valuable. I do recommend eventually installing that. So with that, I'll click next. And for me, you'll see that this pops up here. If you want to allow this app to make changes to your computer, you would have to accept to say yes. And it is going to be a 64-bit installation. So while that goes through there, I'm going to talk about the technical specifications to run Alteryx the most optimal way. So to run Alteryx as best as it can as a tool, ideally, well, for sure you're going to need at least Windows 7, okay, with at least a single quad core chip, okay. In a perfect world, your processor would be about, and we're talking about the technical specifications here. In a perfect world, your processor would be about 2.5 gigahertz or faster. Mine's actually a little lower than that, but it works just fine. The recommended gigs of RAM that people should have to run Alteryx at its fastest is going to be minimum 16. I shouldn't say minimum. 16 gigs of RAM is the recommended amount of random access memory, and you can still run it on 8 gigs of RAM. I have colleagues that do that. It will still run. You just might get a couple errors in the processing that down the line you're going to be using. Join tools, sort tools, the really memory intensive tools that we'll be using and we'll be talking about in this Essentials course takes a lot of memory to process. Alteryx is fast, but it also utilizes a lot of your computer's resources. So a couple ways to combat that is if you have, for example, Google Chrome running, you'll see I don't have my usual 30 tabs open up there. You're going to want to close as many tabs, as many processes that are going to be taking up a lot of RAM space, like Tableau, like Power BI, and try not to run those in tandem if you don't need to, because Alteryx will just be that much faster. From that, for disk space, it's ideal to have 500 gigs to a terabyte of data from a disk size standpoint. I think I have a half, so half a terabyte. So again, if you don't meet these specs, Alteryx probably will still run unless you don't have at least Windows 7, then you're kind of out of luck there. But you will, or you won't be utilizing his processing to the fullest. And you'll notice I'm actually on a Windows computer, right? So one call out that Luke Stanky often reminds me of is that Alteryx is not actually on a Mac. There's no Mac version, at least yet. So what do those Mac users do? A lot of times Mac users have a software like Parallels, I think it's called. Wouldn't know, haven't been a MacBook person myself for a little bit now. But a lot of times if you can run a Windows instance on your MacBook, then you'll be able to run Alteryx as well on that. So that's another option for those Mac users out there. Tableau has the web browser version, as a couple other softwares do. Alteryx does not have a web browser version, unfortunately. Hoping for that someday, but for now, it is something that you have to install locally on a machine to run. And from a license standpoint, since we're here, we're going to spend a little bit of time waiting for this to install for the first time. Alteryx runs about anywhere from 5 to 6K, but talk to your local sales rep about that. So it's not a cheap tool necessarily, but it's a valuable tool that allows you to have a lot of return on that investment. So one thing I like to tell people is I could most likely pretty quickly find a $10,000 problem at your company and put a $5,000, $6,000 tool against it and get your payback on that one. So that's how they combat that. But from a license standpoint, do note that your trial license, your company license, that's all per person. Yeah, it looks like we got a call here. Parallels works great in the chat. So I know I've had a couple colleagues that have used it, and it works great. So okay, we also have a question here. I have the Alteryx Designer, one-year student. Is there a way to install the R package later? Yes, good question, good call out. There is a way you can install it later. So definitely, if you want to get through kind of this thing right now, you can always go to the Alteryx site and download the R package at a later date. Cool. So if you have Alteryx open and all of a sudden you decided you wanted to install it again for some reason, you might get this warning. Close all instances of Alteryx before continuing. I already have Alteryx installed. It's my admin install. What I was doing here, what I was demonstrating here is the non-admin install. So there's a non-administrative, so you don't have to have admin rights to your computer to install the trial version of Alteryx. Likewise, if you have or you wish to have two different versions of Alteryx on your computer, this is going to be the route. So for me, I like to use the admin version for the most current designer version that I'm using, kind of my production version. And then on the flip side, I also participate in the beta program, so testing versions that are not yet released to the public. And usually I install that version on my user instance. So it's just going to be a difference of where that's stored. So while they're both, of course, 64-bit pieces of software, one's going to be installed in your user directory, and the other one's going to be installed in your program data area. So I just want to call that out there. Okay, so you can press OK. I'm going to cancel. And what we'll do here is we'll actually launch Alteryx for the first time. So go ahead. Once you click install, once it installs your Python dependencies and all that kind of stuff, you'll get to this window. So while you're clicking through those buttons and getting through that, I'll start to kind of cover an overview of what Alteryx Designer looks like here, and in general what the tool palette and stuff looks like. So I'm guessing you probably got to about this part. Which one do you want to install, predictive or the other one? Again, it's just that one. So I'm just going to exit out of that one because I already have the tool installed here. So keep going through that process and just kind of listen along while we're going through here. So the first time you launch Alteryx, you most likely will have a loading screen that's like, take a tour of Alteryx. It's very useful, and I recommend going through that and working through that, because it will explain a lot of what we're going through right now. So it'll just be a good refresher. For us, we can just kind of exit out of that because we're going to kind of cover that right now. So almost every time that you open up Alteryx, unless you configure it to not do this anymore, it's going to launch the Start Here option. So there's a nice little trick that Mr. Ben Moss, other fellow Alteryx ace, has talked about in the community. This is a nice little way to make there be some legends on your opening workflows. So every single time that you open Alteryx, it'd be super nice if you can get a legend to populate right here, or maybe your company's color palette or something like that. So keep in mind that there is a way to manipulate the Start Here button to kind of launch a template. And you do that in your options. Actually, do that in your configuration file. So if you search Start Here in your Alteryx install folder, and you put a workflow in there, it'll be a nice little template. I'll drop that in the description and links after this because it is super useful. But just at a high level, it'll launch, and it'll launch the Starting Here button. So right here, we see our first tool. We're not going to go into it too much, but this is what's called an Explorer tool. So right here is where you can embed a website or a URL or even a local file directory, which is what this is doing, as you can see here, to start to explore what's in that folder. Alteryx here is utilizing this as a technique to train us on how to start to use Alteryx Designer. Pretty nifty, using their own tool to train in the tool. Good idea. For us, we're going to start at the top and at the beginning, okay? So first I will put this browser underneath there so I don't get distracted by any of that stuff. And I'll make this as large as possible. Okay. Cool. So let's go and start at the top left here. So File. This is just going to be your classic file, right? You can launch a couple of things there. It's not going to be too much different than other software there. This is going to be where, let's see if you're seeing that on the screen, where you can launch a new workflow, where you can open recent workflows, where you can save your workflow, and a couple other things that we don't have to go into right now. Edit, that's just going to be your classic things. Keep in mind that there's almost unlimited undos right out of the box, I think, or at least as many undos as I need, at least at the beginning. You can always increase your undo, your Control Z limit, but just note that it will take more temporary space and file space when running Alteryx. But there's a lot of undos there, just like other tools like Tableau. A cool thing that you can do with workflows is you can copy a bunch of steps that you've created and then paste them on a different workflow, or maybe package them up on something. So keep in mind you can still copy and paste just like in other tools here. Going over to View, there's a couple of things that are defaulted as an option already. So your tool palette, right? So that's going to be up top. We're going to run through that in a second. You have your results window and your configuration. You don't have to worry about the overview for now. You don't have to worry about Interface Designer for right now. Interface Designer is how we make macros and analytical applications in Alteryx. Super powerful stuff. That'll be another live, training session on Data Coach Live. So for us, why don't we stop there and let's go and talk about those three options here. So we have the canvas area. So if we launch a new workflow here, just by clicking that plus button here, if you launch something new, it'll launch what's called a new workflow. Okay. So a YXMD is a file type of Alteryx's that indicates that that's a workflow. So a YX file type, anytime you see that, it's going to indicate that it's an Alteryx file type. After that, you'll see two letters, okay? So it's going to be MD, which indicates module. Those are going to be your normal workflows. From there, there's also stuff like WZ, which is a wizard that indicates that there is an analytical application happening or that was created. There's going to be an MC, YXMC, that'll be a macro. There's a YXZP, and that's going to be an Alteryx zip file. So a lot of these are just file types that are Alteryx specific. For us, when we create new workflow, we're creating a module, a YXMD. Starting from scratch here, a nice clean slate. We have a blank Alteryx canvas. Okay, so here is where we start to drop our tools. So you'll see I just went and navigated up to the upper left. The number one tool on your favorites bar is going to be that browse tool. Okay, I think that might be the number one tool in Alteryx. And why is that? Because the browse tool is on almost every workflow that you create or that you inherit, because it's a good way to browse what's going on with that data, hence the binoculars there. We'll get into that. We'll get into a lot of the tools here, but for now, let's just go to something, for example, select as a tool. And I just want to show you this here. On a lot of these tools, there's an open example. So with Alteryx as a tool, it already comes packaged up with it a lot of practice problems that you can use. If you can use them, they're going to be hyperlinked a lot of times in the tool, or they'll be you'll be able to find those in the options, which we'll go into, or in the help section. Correcting myself here. But if we go ahead and click on that open example, I'll just zoom in so you can kind of see it a little bit better there. If you click on that open example button, as I will here, it'll launch a workflow. And what this select workflow does is it tells you what the tool does, but then it also packages up an input file, some sample data for you to work with, so that you can start to explore Alteryx that way. So let's do that. I clicked on the input tool. That'll be our second, or I guess third tool that we've learned about, or maybe second tool. An input tool here to just show you what the configuration menu is. So we'll talk about the input tool, but basically that's where it all begins in Alteryx anyways for us. So clicking on this input tool, we'll see over here to the left, this section is what's called the configuration. Every tool in Alteryx has a different configuration window or area. So think of every tool as maybe a little gadget that you need to program for it to work correctly. So the gadget's there, you just have to adjust the settings for it to work properly. Okay? So for the input tool, that's what this looks like. At the top, for the input tool specifically, you have this drop down where you can click there, and then you'll say, okay, I want to go to a flat file that I want to connect to, and I want to go to Microsoft Excel, for example, and connect to a Microsoft Excel file. Maybe you want to do something like a flat file like a CSV or a comma-separated valued file. You can also put that in there. So it's a way to manually navigate to the file or database or spatial file or something like that that you want to connect to. So that's just one option of a few here for input. Once you have that selected in the input specifically, you'll see a little preview of what our results are. So this might remind you of Excel. You have your columns up and down, right? You have your rows left and right, and you're previewing the data that you're about to work with. So we'll go through a couple other options here, but in general, just keep in mind the left side of the Alteryx Designer area is what's called the configuration, in case anyone asks you to go there or navigate there. Okay. So I'm going to click on the white space area. That's just right there. And every time you click on the white space on the Alteryx canvas, it'll basically default to your starting setting. If we look back over at the configuration area, that's you can see a couple of different options. This is the configuration for the workflow itself. So we're not going to go into too many of those options today. It's definitely for another time. But in general, you can say, what do I want my tools over here to be a layout direction of vertical versus horizontal? I prefer horizontal. A lot of people might have a very tall monitor that they want to build the workflow down. That's how it started. Actually, I think that's the original Alteryx had that way. To each their own. There's a couple different thought leaders on that matter. Go to workflow. This is how you can control the different types of workflows that you have. For us today, we're just going to be focusing on, again, what's called a standard workflow. Okay. So if you go to the workflow option after pressing your control or pressing your canvas there, it'll be a default to an analytical workflow. We're not going to be talking about analytical applications today, but those are kind of GUIs or graphic user interfaces that you can create and deploy using Alteryx Server to business users at your company. So if you create an analytical application, publish it to Server, somebody else without Alteryx Designer can run your workflow. Macros. That's a really cool functionality of Alteryx is a macro. So basically there's 3 types of macros. Technically there's 4, but you have your standard macro. You have your batch macro, which passes through a lot of different records through a certain kind of processing or pattern that you've created. There's also the iterative macro, and that's kind of, think of it as like do something until kind of process. So it's a good way to have a record go through some kind of thing that you built and see if it meets a certain criteria. And then the 4th, but often forgot about, sadly, is called the localization macro. And that, again, is kind of a callback to Alteryx's roots as being a geospatial company from its start time. So a couple other things here. We're not going to go into it at all. That's probably as much detail as I'm going to give you from this. But we do have some constants that you can utilize here. We can go into runtime. We might talk about that a little later from some workflow optimization standpoint. Events, like if your workflow fails or something like that, send me an email. There's also some meta info, so that'll be good, especially from a metadata management standpoint and from documentation standpoint. And then the XML view, if you're getting really crazy in Alteryx. So with that, you have your, again, your canvas area, your configuration area, and the third, but the most fun to play around with a lot of times is going to be your results area. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you the coolest button in the Alteryx Designer tool, the Run button. So if you click on that, it kicks off a process of what you built. So it says, hey, input, go grab that data that I configured you to go get. Hey, select tools, which are these guys right here. Go do the configuration that I indicated for you to do. And then once we press that Run button, now we can see some results here. So not only do we see the results in full if we have a browse after it, but you'll see that if you hover over any field name or column name, it'll have a nice little green bar there. It might have a yellow bar there. There might be a couple of different bars there, like red or something. What that is indicating is the data quality. So it's already assessing the data quality of your input. Do we have any nulls in that column? Do we have any errors? Do we have anything with trailing or leading spaces? Alteryx will actually indicate that stuff. So you'll see up here, if I go to help, we'll get back to here, you'll see that I'm actually on 2020.1. Okay, so that version of Alteryx, that if you downloaded the trial version that I sent you to, that will give you some options of browse that other users who have 2019 and previous may not be familiar with. So as of this version, we have this new browse area. So if I click on this browse tool, with the binoculars, what this is doing over here to the left is it's actually profiling my data. So it's saying how many out of my 90 records, how many of those look okay? And how does it determine whether or not it's okay? Well, it looks at the data type. It looks at if it's numeric. It looks at if it's alpha, if it's a string, if it's a data type, that sort of thing. You can see how many unique data types there are for this value specifically, this customer ID. Let's look to see if there's any non-uniques if we go over here and click on that string. So now this column here, this first name column here on our customer ID file is now being profiled over here in our configuration window. You'll see it's a string type. So there's going to be certain activities that run against it to check whether or not it's okay. We'll see there's 80 unique values in that column. So to us, that's indicating that 10 at least are duplicated. Or I would say I have at least one match. So we have 10 duplicates there. So maybe that's okay. It's a first name. There's going to be a couple repeats. If it's an ID field, that's going to be a quick indicator that there's something up with the data that we need to go talk to the SME or the subject matter expert of whoever owns that data set. Maybe we can use Alteryx Connect to find that person. But in general, most of the samples that we're going to be working with in Alteryx I think it's safe to say they're going to have 1 or 2 problems in the data set that we can identify that we'll be able to fix, and that's by design. So you'll see that the practice problems that I'll navigate to here shortly that we provide for the practice section of this training today, those are going to have 1 basically problem that we need to solve using a specific tool. So a good way to start to learn Alteryx and start to learn the tool is to figure out what the tools do. There's like 200 tools that come out of the box in Alteryx or something like that. On top of that, you can go to the community, and there's a bunch of different custom tools, really cool and powerful tools that you can download and install into the platform to extend your Alteryx Designer tool even further. What we're going to do is we're going to start from the beginning. Okay, looking at the top, you have your tool palette. Here you'll see you have the favorites. Okay, these are going to be, you guessed it, the favorite tools that people like to use, the favorite tools or the most tools that people are hitting those run buttons on, or that are on those canvas. That's what makes this to the favorites bar. We're going to cover a lot of these, if not most of them today. From there, you'll notice that there's other tool palettes. So those go in order of popularity. The first one, this section, is going to be the in and out. So that's where you're going to see your browse tool again, right? What comes out of your data? Let's look at it. That's why the browse is in there. Another example, and a big one, is going to be the input data tool. So again, that's where it all starts with Alteryx. That's where you're going to go get your flat file. That's where you're going to put and configure maybe your a database connection to HANA, to Hadoop, to Snowflake. There might be some spatial data that you want to bring in, so maybe we're going to go look at a map at input. And then at the end, while we're all here, is of course the output tool. So what we're going to actually try to output, is that going to be to Tableau server directly there? Is that going to be 100 Excel files that are built based on 100 different manager names? Is that going to be a JSON file that you want to leverage somehow? We can do that here. The last one that I'm going to talk to you about in the in and out section is going to be the text input tool. So this is going to be the only input tool that you'll notice. If I bring this down here, it's basically going to have almost no configuration, but it's super useful because it's basically a free-form thing that you can say, here's my test data, just looking over at the configuration area. Here's my test data. Here is my dummy data. Maybe this is some kind of API key that you want to pass through, or maybe it's a spot that you want to leverage your user to pass their API key through, and you just want to put a dummy key in there for now. But basically, it's your free-form input tool, and you'll see a lot of that in the packaged stuff here in Alteryx Designer, because they'll include these example files right a lot of times in the text input. Okay, so that kind of takes care of the in and out section. Probably the most popular section, and it makes sense in terms of how this is structured and ordered. The next section that's the most popular is the preparation area. So you might see a couple tools in here that I have on my canvas that I like to use as well. There's a couple tools that I've downloaded from the community that are super useful, that aren't out of the box Alteryx, that aren't necessarily supported by Alteryx, but that I leverage a lot. For example, that one I think I just chose. There's also another one where it says remove nulls, which is a nice one. But the big ones here that we'll talk about is data cleansing today. We'll talk about filtering. So it's kind of a true and false tool. If it meets a condition, pass the files through or pass the records through. If it doesn't, don't worry about them. Formula, that's going to be a big one. Writing calculations. Your formulas in Excel. You don't have to do the equals and all that kind of stuff. We'll actually utilize and leverage expressions in these editors. There's built-in functions that you can leverage in formula tools. There's a lot of examples that you can already leverage too. So we'll run through some of those, especially in our practice problems today. Generate rows, that's a fun one, especially if you're trying to create a bunch of data, maybe some sample data. Or for our Excel users out there, generate rows, and especially multi-row formula. That's a really popular one too. If you've been stuck in Excel hell like a lot of us have been, and you want to kind of do a fill all button where you just double click on every cell and you're filling down, or maybe you want to look up and you want to see when was my last row that was populated, and make it so that everything below it is populated with that value until I get to another value. Those type of activities, all those tools, most of those, arguably all of those kind of scenarios can be addressed and solved using the preparation palette, and if not, one of the other tools in Alteryx. From there, we have join tools. So we'll be going over that. Think of a join as your VLOOKUP, right? Or your index match for our Alteryx, for our Excel gurus out there, index and matching. So your join tool is going to see, hey, I need to have a key on both sides of my data sets. Then enrich my other data set with everything that I find on the other side. If you're a SQL user, this is going to be pretty familiar. Think of that Venn diagram that we see everywhere when we're talking about SQL joins. That's going to be something that we'll leverage using this tool. And then if you are familiar with SQL, you might be familiar with the term outer join. And to accomplish that, we'll leverage what's called the union tool over here. Kind of looks like that DNA looking symbol there. So to create a join there, we'll leverage that. And then finally, just for today, we'll be talking about the transform tool palette. So one of the biggest things I think that people run into when they're starting to visualize their data, or maybe they get a new tool like Tableau, or they get a new tool like Power BI, or they just want to leverage their data in a pivot table format. You'll receive or inherit a lot of times a report that there's dates across the top and months, and you need to flip that into row format. But if you have daily data, or if you have 3 years of, you have 36 columns and you have 3 years of data of monthly data, it's a meticulous activity to copy and paste that 36 times to make sure that you can kind of normalize it in a way that you can visualize it. So that transpose tool is going to be your friend there. On the flip side of that, pun intended, there is the crosstab tool, which instead of having your row kind of in the normal long format that normally you have, you can actually just put it in a crosstab format, which is going to be useful if maybe you need to identify some measures in that way in certain activities, or maybe there's some mass reporting that you want to accomplish that you want to provide your end business users with a crosstab report like that. So with that, I'm just going to check the chat here, make sure the audio is working okay, and check to see if there's any questions at this time. Feel free to drop, people that are joining, feel free to drop some questions in here. I'll keep looking at it, and we'll just address it as soon as we can here. So can we input an R script or Python file? So you can using the Python. So short answer, yes. There's going to be the Jupyter tool that you can utilize. We're not going to go into that stuff today. But you'll see we haven't got up to here yet. But in this kind of global search bar, if you search anything like R or Python, you're going to get some options that populate in there. So first and foremost, it's going to give you the tools that I have installed here. You'll see I have a couple other Python SDK tools in there. I have a Glassdoor scraper that I built a couple years ago. I don't think that works anymore. I haven't looked at that probably for a year with Mr. Tom Larson. You have the Python actual tool, so we can leverage your Python scripts using that. So that's just going to be embedded Jupyter workbook, yeah. And then we have some examples, so you can start to build your own. And then if I just search, if you look lower, which I can actually zoom down there too, in the help area, those are going to be some installation files and some help documents. And then if you go to community, there are going to be some fun articles out there about how people leverage that. And then on the flip side of that, you're going to have your R tool that you're also able to use. So with that, looks like you also figured it out there too. So how did you profile? Yeah, so the profile is just the browse tool. There are also other data investigation tools that are very similar to the browse tool. So if you ever want to output that browse information, which is super useful information, you can go over to the investigative tool palette. With that question, it actually introduces a good question about where are the tools or the tool palettes that I don't see if I just installed Alteryx. So you'll notice that I have a couple folders out here that you might not see on yours. So here's like your Python stuff. If you didn't install the prescriptive stuff as indicated, you might not see some of this stuff there. But what everyone should see, either here or a little bit further down, is this little plus button on your canvas here. So this guy, this little button, is going to be what you're going to be able to press to add more tools. So in general, Alteryx isn't going to give you 200 tools and overwhelm you with all that, because they want you to focus on your favorites. They want you to focus on learning stuff. They want you to get the baseline so you can build up your skill set and get to those really large value add activities towards the end. So if we go ahead and click on that, you'll see I had this indicated as the Getting Started tool palette suite. So if you click on that drop down there, you'll see that there's a couple other options on there. So there's Getting Started, so that's going to be your basic tool palettes, your in and out, your preparation, the join, transform, that type of thing. And then also from there, you can also add Parse, which is what we're going to go over today. So I do want you to add that one. We're going to go over, we're not going to go over in database or reporting, but both of those tool palettes are going to be something that you're going to want to learn and master. And then your spatial analysis. So that's going to be some fun spatial analysis that you're going to want to master too. So for me, I think you can handle it. Why don't you go and on your preset, go down to all, get everything on there, and then press OK. It's not going to have to load anything, it's not going to slow it down or anything like that. It's already loaded if you installed Alteryx. So go ahead and just add everything. And now we can see some other options up here, like our interface tools, our spatial tools, our data investigation tools, and stuff like that. Deepak is going to be like field summary or basic data profile. A lot of that information that you see in the browse tool, you'll be able to extract out of these tools and then leverage if you need to, give to your auditor or maybe give to regulatory people, or just basically create a data document, which is more and more, if it hasn't always been, important today, that metadata management documentation. Okay, with that, I'll also look at this parse tool palette here. So we're going to go over date time parsing. That's a big one. Date time is going to be either if you see a string field or something like that, and you want to translate that to the data type of date. We'll run through how to do that and why that can be important. And then the inverse of that. So if you have a date data type that you instead want to be a string, you can do the reverse of that using that tool. So we'll run through that. Regular expressions, I'm not going to even try to pretend like I'm a master at that at all. But there are ways you can use regex, regular expressions, in Alteryx. And there's some people out there that do some crazy cool parsing out there using regular regex, but then they can also leverage this language, this this programming language in Alteryx. We can open up an example to start to dive in there. But basically, I'm not going to do that. We're not going to go over that today. But basically, there are some drop downs of some kind of like regex for beginners, and saying if you want to do certain things, use this kind of pattern of the programming language. I'll leave it at that. It's cool. It's a cool tool. What we'll go over today is probably a familiar one with our Excel users, and that's going to be text to columns. So stuff that you delimit with comma separated values. That's going to be your classic use case for a text to columns tool, so that you can delimit those using characters like commas, dashes, pipes, which are just basically the lowercase l looking symbols. And from there, there's also XML parse. There's parsing tools like JSON parse, but you're going to find that in the interface section. Couple other ones I'll just review. We're not going to go over tool specific. In database, so Alteryx itself, it brings in data to process locally, which is why when we talked about our specifications, why it's so important to have 16 gigs of memory if you can get it, or more, which is why it's good to have a half a tera to a terabyte of disk space. It's why it's important to have a good CPU, at 2.5 gigahertz versus something lower. You can run Alteryx on something lower, again, but you're just not going to see the performance that you would. Now, that's because we're processing stuff locally. When we're installing Alteryx, you're installing it on the local machine, okay? Whether that be Designer or also if you're doing an on-prem instance, for example, of Server, right? That's going to come with an instance of Alteryx Designer to manage workflows for your company. In database indicates that the processing that takes place in Alteryx occurs not in Alteryx, but in the database. So you're programming, you're creating these workflows. For example, you're ingesting data, you're doing some formulas and new calculations, you're selecting certain fields or you're deselecting certain columns, you're summarizing it, and then you're writing it maybe back to the database. Or maybe you're outputting that, but you're letting the database do the heavy lifting. You're letting the database do the work. And that's what the in-database tools are all about. They're leveraged a lot, and think of it as the best option to process data if you're going to be doing some heavy ETL kind of activities, extracting, transforming, and loading of data, maybe to two tables in Hadoop, or maybe you're trying to get something from HANA, and then you want to put it into Snowflake or something. There might be certain in-database activities that could occur there, so that your computer is your local machine, maybe your laptop, like I'm on right now, is not bogging down that process. You're leveraging the production systems that your company already has in place. So keep that in mind. Reporting tool palette. So there's a lot of things that you can do in Alteryx on the reporting side. Not everyone needs a visualization or a crazy, Sankey chart or something like that built in Tableau to make a business decision. A lot of that stuff you can just create a cross-tab report for 100 managers and distribute all those individually. And in Alteryx, you can do that. There are other visualization options in the reporting area. So you're going to look at something like interactive charts. So that's going to embed some charts, and you can explore those. That you can actually embed some charts. I'm not going to go into it any more than that. You can also do a lot of reporting with maps and rendering of maps through reporting. But you can also just straight up make a table and make a report table, make an Excel spreadsheet kind of looking output to people and kick out and send that on an email. Create some daily job that gives someone their numbers, or maybe gives them some customers that are at risk for churn that they should contact that day. It's not necessarily something that you always need to have a visualization to explain, basically. If you do want a visualization, because I enjoy making them as much as the next person, there are ways that you can output your data to an instance like Tableau, to Power BI, to an R chart or a chart built in R or something like that. So with those things, you can always search for connectors in your tool palettes up here. Or if I am interested in outputting something like to Tableau server or something like that, I can drag this down onto my canvas. I'll put it right here. We'll do our connection, and you can configure that tool to write directly to Tableau. So you can do all of your processing within Alteryx, or if you're maybe running a workflow from Gallery, again, the server product arm of Alteryx, you don't have to bring it locally down into your computer or to bring it down to SharePoint or something like that. You can just push that data as a hyperfile, for example, for Tableau, directly to Tableau as a published data source. So definitely leverage those options. Then you can schedule it. You can kick it off at 6:30 if your extract over in Tableau finishes at 6 a.m. in the morning. Maybe you have an Alteryx workflow that kicks off at 6:30 to refresh a bunch of things there. So just keep those kind of options in mind. And then from here, again, you're going to have your predictive options. You're going to have your spatial options. We'll run through a nice little map option towards the end, where we'll talk about kind of the extendability of Alteryx as a tool. But for now, just know the main ones are like create points so that you can find some centroids and plot things out on a map. There's extendability options like Google's API that you can actually go find a latitude and a longitude of a tool or of an address, and then you can plot it on a map, those types of things. Okay, with that, I'm just checking the chat. Cool, checking the time. We are going to take a break in about 20 minutes or so. But before that, I want to make sure everyone gets their practice problems downloaded, because the last hour and a half, we're going to work through those problems together as a group. And then you can drop some questions in there as well if you need to. So those practice problems should be, if we go back to our live essentials here, I'll bring this on the computer screen. If you go down to, I'm going to refresh this page here. If you go down to the materials section of this area, again, that's going to be Data Coach Alteryx Live. I'll just drop that into the chat in case people need to access it again, or maybe they navigated away from it during the install process. There's going to be the Materials tab for the practice problem. Just dropping this in there in case anyone stepped away. Click here to download. Okay, so once you do that, where was that Tableau connector to ask? So it's in the connectors area, but I'll just go back to that right after I click here. So if I click on this click here to download, what it'll do is it'll go out to tessellation area and go find this nice suite of practice problems that we'll run through. So go ahead, it'll just might take a second for that to load. It looks like it's loading here for me, and that'll just be your typical zip file. So let that download, and in the meantime, I'll go check out this question here. Where's that Tableau connector? So we pull up Alteryx here. A good way to find tools that you might not know where they are or something like that, a lot of times is going to be in this global search area. Okay, so if you just start typing in Tableau, you can just click that and then bring it down onto your canvas right from the search bar, which is super handy. So I'll do that. And then whenever you're done with your workflow, the pipe of work that's going through your workflow, for example, right here, if I wanted it to be right there, you can just drop it right on top of the wire there. And you'll see, and we'll talk about this, it's actually a macro that someone built that now Alteryx maintains. And this is where you configure it. So if you have something configured already in Tableau, you can do it there, and then you can recite and URL and stuff there. So over here, while that downloads, I'm going to see if that's downloading now. So for me, it worked. I'll just give that another minute for people just to make sure that they're seeing it download successfully for them. And then let's pull back, or let's go back to our Alteryx workflow here. Cool. So a couple of things that we left kind of we didn't talk about yet, and we'll end at in 15 minutes here. But I do want to get to here to this point here. If you go to options, there's going to be a couple options that you want to make sure to configure from a best practices standpoint. Okay, so if you want to run your workflow, there it is. Let's talk about the hotkey to do that. Control R. So that should be, I think my thumb and finger are always on the Control and R the entire time I'm programming and or making my workflows in Alteryx. So that's going to be probably your favorite hotkey, followed by Control Shift B, which we'll talk about, which adds a browse to the end of your tools. You can schedule your workflows. We're not going to go into that. That's more of a functionality of Gallery or the Automate, a scheduler tool that used to be around. You can run an analytical app. You can export the workflow. I do want to talk about that one because once you do start to build your Alteryx workflows, you're going to have this export workflow option, which is going to be the best option for you that packages up your workflows. And you'll see now that you downloaded those practice problems, some ZP files there. Those are going to be Alteryx zip files. So this will package up the data that you have on your canvas, like an Excel connection, with your workflow to send to somebody else, or drop to somebody else on Dropbox or store in S3 or something like that. So that's going to be an important one. Versus if you just copy your workflow and send it to a colleague, if it's connected to, for example, an Excel workbook, that workbook is not going to be packaged up with it. It's just going to break, and then your colleague's going to ask you, hey, can you send me that Excel file that goes along with this? So there's going to be your manage files section here. Manage licenses. So that's where you go and put your new key. Once you go through the trial version, you realize you love the tool, you can put your key right in there. Connect credentials. Again, that's that metadata managing arm from a product standpoint of Alteryx. Promote is the product that pushes the predictive models up into your production environments. And then user settings. So this is going to be a good one to configure. Let's go in there and click on Edit User Settings. So here I like to give it some more dedicated sort memory. So that's why you see the 4064. Alteryx Designer is going to do a pretty good job of guessing how much memory you want to allocate towards your sort and your join tools. So you might not want to configure that, but I like that setting. temporary directory. Mine's in my engine folder. Show startup here. You can have that or not if you want. And then the last one that I want to go over is Canvas. So a big and useful setting that everyone, it should be by default, but I don't think it is, should be checked is this display macros indicator on tools. So this one is going to be something that you want to check because we'll find out that Alteryx actually has two different types of tools, a native tool and then a macro, right? We already talked about macros, or we touched on it, but here's a good way to figure out which of these tools that come out of the box with Alteryx are macros or not. So like your data cleanse tool, that's going to be a macro. And we can see that if we have this checked as an indicator. Okay. Another good one, I like to default my base map. I don't think I figured out how to do that until like 2 years into using the tool, or maybe 3 years or something. But Alteryx has a lot of nice maps now. And if you go to like Alteryx Streets, most recent vintage, that's a pretty good option. So you go ahead and do that. And now I'll show you if you bring the select tool on the canvas versus if you bring the data cleanse tool on the canvas. Now that we have that indicate macro option checked there, you'll see that, and by the way, don't worry about that red exclamation mark. It just means it's not configured correctly yet. You'll see though, if you see this little black button right there, that's a macro indicator. So that's indicating that this tool is a tool that encloses a lot of other tools. And what do I mean by that? Open a macro. So it's a cleanse YXMC, an Alteryx macro. We right click on that, you can open up the tool because of that little macro indicator. And now you can see actually what's going on under the hood of this tool. So this nice data cleanse macro, which if I go over here, and let's say I have this configured, this data cleanse macro actually configured in a correct way. You'll notice over here to the left on the canvas, over to the left where your configuration is, left of the canvas, there's going to be a couple different things that you can configure. So if we have some fields here, I'll say test, and then 1, and then 3 or 2. You click on the data cleanse configuration window. This is what that looks like, and it looks pretty nice, kind of like an application or kind of like a GUI interface because it's utilizing macros in the tool itself. So if we go over to the cleanse macro tool, which is what this tool is, you'll see up here interface tools. These are super useful, a little more complicated, or at least a little more intimidating than what we're going to be going over this afternoon during our practice problems. So I'm not going to go into it today in detail. But what these interface tools do is allow you to give your user additional options, such as data validation steps, like a drop-down or radio buttons, or maybe they would need to type in or indicate from a date calendar standpoint your starting date and your end date. Stuff like that is going to be utilizing interface tool palette, which is this one up here. So anything that you see that plus button next to the tool is going to be a packaged up macro. And a lot of those macros are now just basically recognizable and very popular Alteryx tools. But just keep in mind for that. We'll go over quickly what the data cleanse tool does to wrap up here, because it is a fun one. So we have our text input tool here. So right now we know our input tool, which you can use Excel files with. You can use databases. We have our text input tool, which again is just a free form tool. And then we have our data cleanse tool. So the data cleanse tool is a really nice way to start to clean up your data quickly if you inherit something like an Excel file or maybe some dirty data from HANA that you want to remove those trailing spaces and dedupe not dedupe your data, but maybe make some stuff proper or title case versus some other ones. So you can select the fields that we're using here in this area, okay? Then you have your data cleanse options. You can say, do I have any string fields that are null? If so, maybe do I want them to be blank? That's not always the case that you want that, but for me, I'll keep that checked. And then kind of same story on the numeric side of the equation. Any of my numeric fields populated with nulls, and instead do I want them populated with a 0? Maybe that should have been what it should have been all along, and now I'm just kind of cleaning that up. You can do that here. Remove unwanted characters. So now we're talking string data types, right? So a lot of times you might try to do a VLOOKUP, and then you get that elusive hashtag NA value that gets returned because it's not finding a match. A lot of times it's because of trailing spaces. Super annoying, I know. Been there. Here, you can just pass the data right on through, and it takes away the leading and trailing spaces if you have those options selected. Another one that's can be a little frustrating are tabs, especially like if you have an Excel cell that has a tab in there, has that character or that carriage return in there. This will remove that. All white space, that's going to be something that you use maybe not all that often unless you're really trying to remove any white space even in between like names and stuff. Maybe there are situations that you want to remove all numbers in your values. And then the same thing with punctuation. Maybe punctuation just shouldn't be there. Maybe it's throwing off something in your database and you get that punctuation out there. It'll do that. Another cool one is this modify case. So that's going to allow you to do to make anything uppercase, going to make anything lowercase, and everything that's a proper form. So that would be like a capital N-I-C-K for Nick versus all lowercase or something like that. And it will do that for every single pattern that you see in that string value field. So that's a fun one. Again, that's a cool macro. And we'll just kind of end that by saying, here's our 3 tools. We have our text input, we have our data cleanse tool, and we have our browse. So that itself is a workflow. That's what we built here. And now we can have, and we probably wouldn't use a text input tool, but in general, if you're trying to cleanse a lot of data quickly, it might start off with, as opposed to a text input, might be an input data tool. And maybe that's an Excel spreadsheet that goes through a data cleanse tool and then gets output to, for example, an Excel spreadsheet. So let's go find an Excel or a good path. Maybe I'll make a file here. So I'm going to say a file versus if I had a data source like a Postgres database, or maybe I wanted to drop it in Snowflake or something, I could do that. I could also dump it into Alteryx Gallery. For me, I'm just going to create a file. I could do an Excel spreadsheet. I can also do a hyperfile. That seems pretty fun. Let's do that. I'll just drop a hyperfile here in my tessellation folder. I'll call this my Alteryx Essentials. Cool. I'll create a new file. You can also overwrite existing files, or you can even append data to stuff. So using my handy dandy Control-R, I will run the workflow. As expected, didn't take too long. Took about 1.3 seconds to run that, just due to the file size. And now if I go to my desktop, which is just on my other screen here, I can say, where is my data coach? What did I call it again? I already forgot. Oh yeah. So if I go to my canvas, click on the white space, and then you'll see in the results window, which we haven't gone into too much, there's this hyperlink here. If I click on that, that makes sense. A lot of times it'll navigate to where I landed it. Right now, I shouldn't have landed it there probably. But what I can do is open it up as a hyperfile here. And what I need to do is I need to do an open with, because I just recently updated my Tableau. And since I wrote to a hyperfile, what it's trying to do is it's trying to find the software to open that file up with. And since I haven't yet indicated that you should open up my new hyperfiles with my new Tableau, that's why that happened. So here we have it. I'll put it on the other screen. Here's our sheet 1, our very thrilling data set that we just created here. But instead of just having these 3, let's say I like that process that I just created, but instead, let's just close this out. Instead, maybe I have another, maybe a more massive data set that I want to use. Maybe it's a data set that has quantity and sales and that type of stuff. What I can do is I can still keep my data cleanse activity there, and maybe I'm saying I prototyped with my text input, and now I'm ready for production. So I'm ready for the actual file. I can keep those other steps there, and you can see what I did is I removed the original input there, and what I did just there, and I'll do it again here just so you can see it a little easier. I'm actually clicking and dragging and holding the Excel file from my file directory over the Alteryx canvas. And what Alteryx is going to do when I release it here is it's going to say, okay, now that you are dropping this file onto my canvas, I'm going to know how to configure that because I recognize that this file here is an Excel spreadsheet. So I'm going to already go to Excel. I already know it's an Excel spreadsheet. Hey, Nick, go choose the sheet in that Excel workbook, that worksheet that you want to use. It's going to default to the first option, or you can select a range, or maybe you can select a name range or something. I'm going to press OK. I know that data is good. And now that that's on there, I can see here's my configuration. Here are my first 100 records that I'm sampling in my input tool here. And I already know about my control R, so I'm going to press that to run my workflow. And now all my configurations that I made with the data cleanse tool are still valid. Now it's just using a different set. So now we're talking more like 10,000 records, also processing in about 4.4 seconds, which is probably pretty slow compared to maybe what we actually see in the real world if I wasn't utilizing memory to stream this training session, for example. And then the last tip before we take a little break here is I actually just right-clicked on this input tool, and you can go to this option that says Cache and Run Workflow. So let's do that. Let's right-click on here and then use that option. And what this does, so during your development phase, which will happen after lunch here, during your development phase, this is going to speed that up because it's going to create a temporary file, a YXDB in the temporary location. So again, that's another Alteryx data type, a database. It's kind of like a SQLite file. And that's going to cache it so that the next time that it runs, it doesn't have to go to that input tool or that location and grab that data again. It'll just go to that Alteryx database file. So this time it took 4 seconds to run. I'll run it again, now cached. Now it took half that time. So it went from 4.1 seconds or 4 seconds to 2 seconds. It doesn't seem like a big deal, not when we're talking 2 seconds saved. But if you're processing something for a half an hour, because that's just how long it takes, if anyone has been in the Microsoft Access database world, I think you know what I'm talking about when I say processing can take an hour, 3 hours when you hit that go button. If you're developing something, you can cache your input so that you can develop a lot faster. So that something that might have taken you 2 minutes to develop previously maybe only takes 30 seconds or a minute to run. That's going to add up big time during your development phase, and it'll definitely speed that stuff up. So with that, we'll check back here at 12:45 or in 15 minutes from now. Since not everyone's on Central Standard Time. In about 15 minutes, we'll jump back on. We'll open up those practice problems, and we'll start to dig into creating more specific workflows to solve some more specific problems. So with that, I'll see you in a bit. Thanks. All right, let's start to get going here again. Just checking out the chat. And we have about 2 minutes here. Check out something quick. I think I saw something in there about Tableau prep and Alteryx. So let's chat about that too. I think that was, who do we got here that asked about that? Yeah, Joel. So let's quick chat about the advantages and disadvantages of Alteryx versus Tableau prep, because there is a lot of chatter in the self-service analytics community about which one is better. So while I start to talk about what Tableau prep is, I'm also going to go out to the tessellation blog out on our website, on our company website. I'm going to drop an article out there on the chat because Aiden Brommel, who is a Alteryx server guru, Tableau server guru, also an tessellation person. She has actually written a series about advantages and disadvantages of both of them, or not necessarily advantages or disadvantages, but maybe why they differ a little bit. But in short, I will say, if your output is not going to be a hyper file, and maybe not a CSV file, then you're not going to be able to use Tableau prep. Tableau prep, its output is going to be, at the end, a hyperfile, or a TDE, which is a Tableau data extract. So, or the other side of that is going to be a CSV file, a comma separated value. So if your output is going to be a bunch of Excel workbooks, or if it's going to be writing to a Snowflake database, or a HANA table, or it's going to be something in that nature, maybe it's going to be an output of a spatial file or something like that, that's going to be a clear indication that Alteryx is going to be the choice for that one. I should call out, though, that, of course, Tableau prep does write to Tableau server also. So it can write to a Postgres database because Alteryx server is Postgres, right? Yep. And so it can do that, but it can't be scheduled without the data add-on package. Similar to Alteryx cannot be scheduled unless you have a instance of gallery, or otherwise known as server. So with that, I'm going to drop Aiden's most recent article. So it's a series. There's a 4-part series. This is the 4th part of 4, which goes into depth on this because it is a popular question and a question that we get a lot. So I'll drop that in the chat here. If I can access it here. So let me just pull that up here and then we'll get started. And hopefully everyone can hear me okay as well. All right, let me jump in here. All right, so that article I just dropped in the chat now, that's going to be a good starter to see the differences between the two. All right, with that, we do want to get into our practice problems here. So hopefully now you've been able to download those files, and they'll look like something like a practice problem here. And so let's do this. Why don't you go ahead and navigate to those files, which I will do as well. And I will go to my downloads folder here, off screen, of course. And if I right click on the zip file, which I will do once I can kind of get it out of the screen here. Okay, perfect. So you'll see that it's a zip file, right? So if we click on the zip file, if you haven't yet, you can go and go to my downloads folder, right click on it, and just do extract all, okay? So once you do extract all, you can decide where you want to land it. I'm just going to land it in my downloads folder again, and we can do that. So what that's extracting are Tableau workflows and Tableau Tableau zip files to use for our practice problems. So once we have those, maybe you put them on your desktop or something to save them. But basically, it's going to have 8 different sections of practice problems, and hopefully we can get through most of them or all of them today. If not, what I will do is we'll leave this out there from a practice problem standpoint, and then we're going to work through these today, so we'll have the solutions at the end of them too, to make sure that we can have there's more solutions and more ways to solve an Alteryx problem, but to make sure that you have the solutions, I'll also follow up and put in the description a spot where you can download not only these practice problems and maybe a couple other ones, but also the solutions to them. So don't worry about that. What I will say is I'll encourage you to follow along. So if you haven't yet, launch your Alteryx Designer and let's pull out these problems one at a time and work through them together. So with that, let's navigate to our first one. So number 1, underscore filter. So I'm going to just click and drag, just like our Excel file from earlier. You can click and drag any Alteryx file, really almost any files, out onto the Alteryx canvas, and it'll recognize it. And so once I release that on here, it says, hey, heads up, it's a file, it's an Alteryx package workflow. Do you want to import it? I'm going to say yes. And so why this is packaged up as a YXZP, a ZP file, is because we need to zip up the input file along with the workflow. Just how we covered, if you need to go, so we can click on import, by the way, it'll push that file there. And then how we did that before, right before the break, is you can go to export workflow, and that makes that YXZP file. So once we have that loaded, we're able to work through our practice problem. So we have our data coach kind of template here. We have an input, we have an output. So we'll cover, and right before we take off for the day, which will be in about an hour and 10 minutes, we'll cover what the community of Alteryx is, because that's a big differentiator between Alteryx as a tool versus a lot of other self-service analytics tools out there. There's a huge community that talk to help each other out, help solve some problems. And out there you can find macros, but you can also find this section called Weekly Challenge. I almost called it Workout Wednesday, which is the Tableau side of that that Luke Stanky might recognize him from. But the weekly challenges come out on Mondays. John Emery is a big proponent of that. So if you look out on I Can Alteryx That on YouTube, you'll see him solving that every single Monday almost. So we have some videos out on Data Coach with that as well. But similar format, you start with kind of a messy data set here, and we'll supply a ideal or our target data that we want to get to. So a lot of times you will be talking to end users and business users and saying, I need the data to provide me X, Y, and Z. And here's the ideal data structure that I need to create to get to that answer. That's in a perfect world. That might not always be the answer. Sometimes they might say, I need to visualize and present where my next bank branch is going to be opened up. So I need a map that tells me that. So these kind of questions are going to be something that once you start to get to know more and more tools in Alteryx, you're going to start to be able to plan 2, 3, 6 steps ahead and know that you need to get to here, and then you'll start to fill in the blanks during that T portion of the ETL, during that transformation portion of extracting, transforming, and loading. And those kind of puzzle pieces will become more and more clear as you work through these practice problems and get through these tools. So let's kick it off here. We already covered the input tool. So pretty much any kind of practice problem. And before that, let me just pause. I do want to check the chat and see if there's any questions. Joel asked, and the pricing between both. Thanks for the answer. So the pricing, I think as indicated at the beginning, You're gonna talk to your sales reps because there's gonna be some deals if you buy more than just one or something like that. For the most part, it is around $6,000 for an Alteryx Designer license. And check the article that Aiden posted. She might have put something else out in there, but you're not gonna buy Prep unless you have Tableau Desktop, and it's gonna be more like a bundle. So Tableau Prep in general, objectively, would be cheaper if you're looking at the two tools, but you're also getting different tools. So it's not like you're comparing the same product, in my opinion. So, but yeah, I mean, the Tableau Prep will be cheaper as a standalone tool, but it's not a standalone tool. You have to have Tableau Desktop and stuff with it too. So all these things need to be taken into account. Right tool for the right job, basically, is the answer on that one. So with that, let's take a look at our first practice problem here. So we have the filter tool practice. I'm just going to close out the extra workflows that I don't need. I'll keep the start here button out there. Why not? So we have our input data and we have our target data that we just talked about. So as opposed to clicking that run button, I'm actually going to use the Control R, right? That hotkey. And I'm going to see that I have 275 records here. And I'll zoom in on the canvas. Let me know if that's not large enough for you to see. I'll zoom in here and we'll take a look at what our problem is. So in this practice, we're going to have two goals. So pretend these goals are something that maybe your manager or maybe your colleague or something like that requested from you. So we have to create a basic filter that returns countries whose name contains the letter Z. So that's a pretty straightforward example. There'll probably be more complex asks of a filtering tool, but we'll start with that. So we'll see that the person actually called out a basic filter. So if you've been in Alteryx, you'll know that there's two different types of filters in the filter tool. And to view those, we need to bring down the filter tool, of course. So that's going to be one of your favorites. That's going to be one of the main tools that you always start off with on your favorites bar. That's going to be the filter tool. So what we can do is we can click and drag that down to this little box. And kind of the long way to do this is drop it there in the square, go to what's called my output anchor, which is going to be that little green dot there. Click and drag and connect it to the filter's input anchor, okay? Another way to view those things are right down here in your results window. So right here you have the input anchor, which is what we can see going into the filter tool. So this area here, again, is the results window, as we've talked about here, right? So we have this icon is the same icon as this. So if it makes sense, or I think it makes sense, that's why we can see the results that we do here. So this is what's going into the tool, okay? So what comes out of the tool is going to be what's our output anchor. So again, from a shape standpoint, it's going to be the same shape, but we don't have anything there yet because we haven't ran our workflow. So let's run our workflow and we'll get an error. That indicates that we haven't configured our tool correctly. So this little red button there, if we click on it, we'll know that we now should go over to our configuration. As a reminder, all the tools have their own configuration window. Even the canvas, if we click on the white space, has its own configuration options. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the filter tool and we're going to configure it. We're going to tweak the tool to do what we want it to. So as a reminder, we want to create a filter that returns all countries. So we're going to go and say, here's my country. That's the field that we're working with that contain the letter Z. So the cool thing with this is, if you haven't seen, or if you didn't notice, it's kind of grayed out, so it's a little hard to see. In the custom fields section, Alteryx is actually building the expression that's going to give this a Boolean answer, a true or a false. So think of the filter as your true or false tool. So it's building that for you here based on this kind of GUI, this kind of graphic user interface here to do that. So what I'll do here is I'm going to right click on the filter tool, as opposed to, I could bring my browse tool down from here in the favorites bar, or I could right click on my tool and I could say add browse after. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to put that in that box that's waiting there for my browse tool so we can see a nice result. So from here you see we have 235 results, or 235 records that we started with. And looks like our result, if we click on the output true anchor, aka this one and this one here, true, false, we see we're only left with 15 records. So it looks like that did what it did. Let's make sure we're checking it. Brazil, Tanzania, skip that one, Mozambique. Those all contain the letter Z. That's working. What's our second ask? Next one is to create a custom filter that returns countries whose name contains letter Z and whose 2019 population is less than 10 million. Okay, so a basic filter in the filter tool can only accomplish one expression. So that we can put two expressions in here, you'd have to click on this little radio button and say custom filter. So we can keep the previous expression that was written for us in there, but then to add an additional one, the syntax or the programming way of saying that is do this thing and do this thing. So we're going to add another expression there, and this is going to be the way that you're going to try to write these things. In the filter tool, as in in the expression editors in Alteryx, if you do that little left bracket there, it's going to give you a list of variables that you can leverage within your expression. So for us, the first thing that we're going to see is the fields and columns that come down from our original data set. So that's why we see the 4 columns there. We see country, population for 2019 and 18, and then we see our land area by square kilometer. Also in there, you'll see some engine variables. So that has to do with the Alteryx engine, which we're not going to go into today, but you are able to leverage those. But we're not going to do that today. So for here, I think the second thing was say, make sure the 2019 population is less than 10 million. So I think if you've done a couple things in Excel or Google Sheets or in general school, then you should be able to say, here's my 10 million. I always have to go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 to make sure I get my million. But then we can run that and see what we get. So again, we're not going to do this button over here. I'm going to use the hotkey, Control R, to run my workflow. And let's go check out our result. So here, just in kind of like a classroom style, we have another issue. We have another thing here. But let's go look at our results. So we'll see that came out of it. We'll see now we're down to 5 records. And let's make sure those 2019 populations are less than 10 million. And looks like that is the case. Nothing more than about 8.6 million. So what we could have done here is also what I'm doing is doing Control C, or you can go to copy. And then what I'll do here is I'll just paste that filter tool in this area, and I can so it saves that configuration, and then I can put that in the same spot there. So now I can show if I'm doing this as like a practice problem or something. Here, I'll show you that trick. If I want to take this away, let's take that out. Let's just keep it as a basic filter here. And let's just say, again, my country needs to contain the letter Z. But now here's that one that we just wrote here. I can also do Control-Shift-B. That's another hotkey, which adds a browse after all of your anchors, and run the workflow. Okay, so it saves the configuration. It's a nice way to say, hey, I like this tool. I want to see what else it does, or I want to use it later on during my workflow. It's super fast. It's super easy just to copy and paste that kind of stuff there. But now you'll see our 2 results. First one containing your 15 records that contain Z, and this one adding an additional criteria to allow those records to pass through, which is a 2019 population of less than 10 million. Here's all my fallouts, right? So if you click on the false anchor, you'll see all these don't have or have either no Z or a population greater than 10 million. So let's see if there's any questions with that, otherwise we'll move on. Cool. All right, let's move on to the next one. So we had filter, and I think the next one is going to be, well, a similar activity, right? So there's filtering, but there's also, there's other different ways to filter your data set. So if you've worked with Excel a lot, you will notice, and we'll just do a quick one on this one, you'll notice that there's a remove duplicates button. Yes, of course, there's that for our Alteryx tool as well. So what I'll do here is I'll bring out this data set. It's just going to be the Superstore data set. I have that handy from the last practice, and I'll bring that out there. And how how we'll see that, I'm just going to put that Excel spreadsheet onto the canvas and bring in people. So how we can see that is very quickly bringing down the unique tool here. And this will say, give me only unique values of certain things. So if I do this, if I highlight both these tools and I hit my hotkey that we talked about, Control-Shift-B, I'm adding a browse to every single output anchor that I have on the canvas. And let's take a look at the differences here. To configure the unique tool, pretty straightforward. You just want to say, how many unique instances of this field do I want to pass through the tool? And then I can click run by doing Control-R. Right here, here's my browse tool on my original data set. Looks like I only had 4 people in there anyways. These are going to be my sales reps, I believe, from this data set. And then on the unique side of things, that's also going to be the case because there's only 4 unique people. But if we go and check out another sheet, for example, orders, and instead of saying people, I think the name is going to be customer name. So let's check out to see how many unique first names and customers that we have. So let's go to customer. Well, how about this instead? Better one. Let's go check out states. So we know how many states there are. Let's run it and see how many unique instances of states are in our data set. Makes sense. I don't think we'd expect more than 49 unless Puerto Rico or something was in there, or DC or something. But right here, we only get 49 records. So what the unique tool is doing here is saying the first instance, unique instance, that you find this field, in our case state, give me that entire full record, and then put everything else into this duplicate output anchor. So we pass through 49 records, and from a duplicate standpoint, we have 9,945 duplicates, and we figure that out pretty quickly, right? So what we can do with that is, if we wanted to make sure our entire data set, there was no duplicates of an entire row in our data set, we can check every single field in there and see if there's any duplicates to dedupe our data, which is a common activity in Excel a lot, right? Especially during that month-end process when maybe you're rerunning some results. So here you'll see that this data set, we're good. We don't have any duplicates in our Superstore data set. We only have unique values. But then from there, you can really see how many you can dedupe from there. So that's the unique tool. That's why it's got that neat little snowflake icon there. So the second one, any questions with that? Drop it in the chat and let me know, by the way. Moving on. So we have our second practice problem, which is going to be our making calculations, I believe. So let's go to here and grab our writing calculations field. So we have a couple ways to create fields or new values in Alteryx. We are going to talk about the numeric calculations. We're going to talk about string calculations. There's also ways to do this like summarize tools. There's also ways to do this with some expression editors. There's a bunch of ways that you can create new values in Alteryx. So I'm going to import again a YXZP file, an Alteryx zip file, and it's going to drop my data there. So let's go and do a numeric calculation first, and then we'll go over to the string calculation. So just as a reminder, numeric, right? Those are your ones and your zeros. Those are your numbers, and then versus string is going to refer to like text data. So like if you wanted to separate first from middle from last name out of one value, that's what that would indicate. So let's look at our target here. So we have a business user that says, in this topic, we will provide examples of numeric calculations using the formula tool and the filter tool. Makes sense. The data set contains order information across multiple dimensions and is perfect for practicing and writing calculation. So looks like it'll be a straightforward thing here. What's our input data and what's our target data? Okay. So first and foremost, let's check out the target data here. And we're saying right here, first we want to make sure that our data types are correctly assigned. So previously we brought down the select tool to deselect some fields. This time we're going to control the data types. So it's just another way. We're going to be basically focusing on the formula tool for here, but it's another way to practice another tool that we'll be using a lot. So let's connect those two tools, our output anchor to our input anchor on input to select. And what do we want to do here? So we want to make sure all our data types are correctly assigned. So we're just confirming this stuff. So we're seeing that row ID is a double, city is a string, that's fine. We don't need to probably make too many changes to this. Right now we're just utilizing it just to see what's in there. Next up, create unit sales price calculations. So that indicates that we're going to be creating a new calculation. So let's go up into our formula here, and I'll just drop that into that nice box there, and then we'll connect the tool of tools. So now that we have the formula connected to the select tool, we'll be able to see some columns to be selected. So over here in the formulas configuration, we can do two things. We can add a new column, which we'll do, or if we needed to, we can override an existing column. Now for me, I like to create a new column when I can during my data sets, just to kind of keep them separated and keep them to make sure that, okay, cool. To make sure that you can monitor what you're doing across the pipeline of your work. So, but for now, we don't have to worry about overriding. We'll just create a new calculation, and we're going to call that unit sale price. Once we have that indicated, there's a couple things you can do. First, I'll keep this in mind here as data preview. This is where we can see if we create a calculation, something populate, if we have the workflow ran already. So we don't see anything in there yet because we haven't clicked that run button. But when we do, we'll see what we're calculating. Next up, just like in the last one, if we do the left bracket there, we'll see a list of the fields that are available to us to use. For us, we're going to be utilizing that Superstore data set. So I'm going to go down to, we know it's create unit sale price. So I'm going to use sales. So I'm just going to start typing in SA, and then I'll see it there. I'll click the key tab so that it populates that into my field. So we know it's by unit, right? So for us, an indicator of what a unit is, I didn't see that in my selection or my options. So what we would do is we utilize that select tool that we dropped in there to go see what fields we do have that sound like a unit. Quantity, that sounds like a unit. So let's go to formula and type in quantity. And there you have it. Last thing, important thing, we'll notice that this is a numeric calculation, right? So let's change and update our data type. Our formula tool is going to default to that wide string. It's a nice catch-all data type. It works for a lot of things, but for best practices, let's just go down and make this a double, which is just a type of numeric data type, right? So from there, I'm interested to see what we get. If you click on your canvas, your Alteryx canvas here, you'll probably see that red indicator go away. Again, that's just to indicate whether or not that tool is configured correctly yet or not. So let's go ahead and press our Control R, run the workflow, and let's see what we get. We had 9,994 records go into it, and that's exactly how many that came out of it. So right here, now we see that preview of that calculation, and that should be what the first row of data calculation is. And here we see that's exactly right. Unit sales, there's our new calculation, utilizing our sales and quantity. I think those are looking pretty good. I think our calculation is working. And that is actually matching the 130 to the 130. So there's our preview. Looking good. With that, looks like we're going to be using our most learned tool, which is the filter tool. So now we're going to utilize that and say filter all the sales that are greater than 1,000. And we want to view the results. So again, I'm going to use my Control-Shift-B shortcut, and I'm going to put my true out there, and I'll click Control-R to run my workflow, and we'll see what we get. So we're filtering out 9,500 records, and we're only focusing on the big sales to kind of make sure we're making the most impact in our analysis. So let's go view our sales, and it's going to be the same stuff up here, but now we see a different preview here for unit of sales because that sales number must have been lower than 1,000. We check here, I would guess. There you go. It was 261, which is why it's in the F part of the filter tool. So I'll check the chat real quick in case there's any questions that right out there right now. Found it, thanks. Want a list with only unique values from state. Yeah, Joel, let's jump back there. I'll show you that one real quick. Cool, thanks, John. Appreciate. Glad it's been helpful. So yeah, Joel, I guess we select first only state and then the unique tool. Yeah, that's right. So if you go to, let's go back to this unique tool here and just kind of do that. So if we want to see the first instance of something, you're going to say, give me the first instance in my data set of state, right? But then if we go down and say sales, it's just going to give me the first instance of sales. If we wanted to do something more like, and we'll get into this tool a little later, if you want to say, give me my state groups, so we're only going to get 49 again, and then instead of saying, give me the first record of sales and give me that sales value, instead, it might be more useful to say, give me the max sales and give me the min. So let's do min and max, and then I'll put a browse after that. Again, we're going to get 49 records here, and then we're going to get the min and max, which is probably a little more useful just than the random first record of our sales. So there you go, and there you have it. Hopefully that answers your question. And then also in here, you'll notice in the results window, this little ellipsis. Let me just zoom in on that because it's an important one. This ellipsis, this 3-dot thing. If you click on that, you're going to have a filter and a sort option there. So now that we've talked about filter, we know what that does. You can go ahead and click that, and you can sort it ascending or descending, right? From smallest to largest number. Very much like an Excel style stuff there. And if you don't want that filter on there anymore, you can go ahead and click on X from the sort, or you can also say, like, I want to say, filter my sales, maybe anything that had less than, or let's say greater than. Maybe I only care about the sales that were greater than 10. Oh, funny. Interesting. Let's see. Looks like interesting. So it looks like the chat. I'm just gonna ditch that chat box. Sounds like that's like from maybe another data coach video. Good call out there. Let's just remove that, and we'll get. I think it's the simultaneous live cast that's causing that issue. So I'll just keep checking the regular one here. Cool. So hopefully that answers your question for the unique thing. Let's move along to another calculation that'll be useful: concatenation. So if you're familiar with Tableau or Excel, maybe putting pipes in between certain strings to basically push other fields and columns together to make one value, then you're going to be familiar with what a concatenation is. So in our writing calculations folder, we'll go to string concatenation practice. And again, you can double click on it, or I like to just drag it right onto my canvas to have that load. Give that a second, and there we have it. So what's our problem? In this practice problem, your goal is to take the 3 fields, state, city, and zip, and concatenate them into a string field named location. So we'll check out the results on that one. And this is kind of a common practice. A lot of times we're going to be provided data like this from an address standpoint that we need to push together because we need to pass that through a lot of times an address API or an app, something that uses an application programming interface. We do that so that we can geocode our results, aka attach a latitude and a longitude to that data. So we'll go into that hopefully if we have a little time with the spatial. Otherwise, maybe we'll just do another live stream where we'll just focus on spatial stuff. But for now, let's check out our input data. You'll see in our results window here, we have state, city, and zip, and our target data looks like we want to format that a little nicer and put it all together. So first and foremost, what you're going to do for the most part with any workflow is attach that select tool or put that select tool down on the canvas. So let's make sure the data types are correctly assigned. And that is the first thing. So we have string, and then we have a zip code. So Alteryx correctly is reading this these characters in this text input in as numeric fields. Makes sense, but if we're going to concatenate this, we have to make sure that all the data types are the same data type. So we actually need to click into the select tool there, go to that drop down that you see. So in the select tool, just like last time, you can change the data type of a field, and you can also rename it. But for us, what we're going to do is go to string. Cool. Size 11, that should be just fine for our zip codes. You can even pump it up to 100 or something like that if you're worried about something else that's going to be bigger. But we'll keep it at 11. You can also make it a widescreen there. And again, you can always call this postal code or something like that, but we can keep that the same. We don't need to rename it for now. Create a location. So that indicator, you need to create something. Just keep those in mind as little indicators when you're talking to business counterparts about creating data, because if you hear create something in this context, that indicates a formula tool. So we can either go drag it from our canvas again. We can go to our preparation and locate it here. As we know, it's in alphabetical order from our preparation tool, so we know F's are up here. Or, I think I showed you this earlier, if you right click on that tool, you can just do an insert after, and then you'll see a drop down that's actually off screen here, but if you do it, you'll see it. Insert after, you can go down to preparation, and you can add your formula tool using that method as well. So we're creating something new. I think we called it location. So let's call it a location column. And now that we have all of our strings, we know that we can build something that makes sense. So right here, I think let's look at our target data just for the format. Normally this would be a business unit telling you what this format is. So we have city, state, and then zip. We also have commas in here and some parens. So let's account for that while we're doing this. So if I go to city, state, and zip, and I run it, we'll see what the preview is, but we can also see what the results are. We're getting close to what our result is, but we still need to format it. So let's go back into our formula tool. We'll see our preview now that we've ran our workflow, and now it's going to be a lot easier to update that and see what our results are. You'll notice here, how am I pushing those things together? It's the plus button. So for numeric calculations, if you use the arithmetic or the plus button in arithmetic fashion, it would add the numeric values, of course. For string data types, it's actually going to push them together, a concatenation. So that's what that's doing. But we also need to add some things here. So we need to format it with a character that looks like that, right? But for text, we need to enclose it in columns. And then again, we need to add that plus button. So this is a little tail end of the thing. That's how we get that parenthesis at the end of our zip code there. We're concatenating a right parenthesis. So that worked well. Let's do that on the other side of the zip code. I like to do the double quotes here and then put something in between there. And then again, we're adding the zip code. We're concatenating the zip code to that. So that's looking pretty good. I think it would look even better if we created a space in between. Cool. And then we also need to get a nice little comma in there between the state and the city, looking good. And then to round it off, I think we should put another space in there. So if we run that, it'll do that not only for that preview, but now for every row. And looks like we're getting the results that we wanted. Okay, we'll move on to the next practice problem here. I'm going to get through them all. Joins. So this is going to be your VLOOKUP. These are going to be your index and matching. The only difference there is that this won't take forever like Microsoft Excel does to do this kind of activity. So it will take up a lot of memory on your computer to use this. This is where that 16 gigs of RAM comes into play versus an 8 gig option. You'll see that that occur, that be very clear from a performance standpoint when you start to use joins, when you start to use sorts as well. So now that we have that loaded, I'll give everyone else a few to load that, and I'll go to see if there's any questions from the last practice problem. I think that's it. Yeah. Cool, so hopefully that's loaded now, and let's go check out, again, by running the workflow, what our target data is. So it looks like there's our answer. Maybe that was a little bit of a spoiler alert, but this is kind of a dark practice problem anyway, so we don't have that much fun with it. Okay, so our practice problem here, we're going to be kind of leveraging the join tool as kind of a filter in this one. So you can either use the join tool to filter out stuff, or you can utilize it to enrich your data. So let's check it out. Natural disasters are a fact of life. If you live along the Gulf Coast, each summer and autumn brings the threat of hurricanes. Folks in Oklahoma live in danger of tornadoes, but probably people in Omaha, Nebraska too. Drought-prone California experiences wildfires almost every year. In this practice, we're going to provide 3 data sets containing the number of fatalities, like tornadoes, wildfires, and flooding, summarized by state from 2010 to 2019. Okay. Additionally, it looks like we're providing a lookup table of all 50 states plus DC. Your goal is to use the several joins to determine which states, if any, have had 0 fatalities due to natural disasters. Maybe we're trying to figure out where to buy our home next, or maybe we're trying to figure out where to put our business that we don't have to deal with natural disasters. All right. So first things first, let's check out what we have here. So let's join the state lookup with tornadoes. So it says it right there. Let's join the data. So that's going to be in our favorites, just like a lot of the tools that we're covering today. And let's just drag that down into that box. And first things first, let's put the we're talking about debating which side to put this on. Let's put the state lookup always in the left. Let's try to keep that pattern going. So we're joining the state lookup to our tornado lookup. Let's just join the 2 to there, and then we'll go and see if there's any common fields. So now you'll see that we have if I zoom in there, the join tool configuration window up here. You look to the left, and there's a couple different things that we need to account for in a join tool. Just like a VLOOKUP, you need to find the key. So there is this option that you can join by record position, which is going to be if this is the first field here, indicated the first field there, and you can join by that. For the most part, you're going to pick this option that's specified fields, and you're going to say what's coming on the left side of my join, which is another way to say what's the first data set that I'm using, and what's the key there based on or compared to the second data set. So that's going to be the right side of my join. Another way to look at it is this Venn diagram that we have down here. So if you have worked with SQL at all, you'll recognize this. It says if you have matches on both sides or in both data sets, you're going to find that Venn diagram filled in the middle. So that's an inner join. Anything that doesn't match on the left side of your data set, right, your first data set that we have here, is going to be a fallout. We'll call it a fallout. That's going to be that outer shaded in area of the left-hand side of that Venn diagram. And then the opposite or inverse of that is going to be the right side. To bring that back into what's called a left outer join, which is where you get everything in that left shaded area in the Venn diagram, along with everything that joined with the inner join, we're going to have to utilize a union tool in Alteryx. So we'll go over that right after this, but for now, we only care about the inner joins or the left joins because we're trying to use it as a filter. Moving on, we already know our key is the state. So go find all the states that are in there. Here we don't need state again. So I can just deselect that and only give me the states that had tornadoes in it. So what I can do here is a couple things. I can do my Control-Shift-B, which will add a browse on my left, inner, and right join. So here, here, and here, left, inner, and right join. And I can run my workflow. Let's think back to the question. We're trying to figure out what states didn't have a tornado disaster. So we know that our inner join, and if I actually, let me bring back that other state just so it's very clear. If I run this workflow again, but keep the right state in there, this is indicating that on the left side of my data, in my state data table, we find Alabama, and in our tornado data set with fatalities, we also find Alabama with tornado fatalities. So that's my inner join. That's the stuff we don't want in our data set because we're trying to get to states that don't have this. So we know, based on that activity, we only care about the left side of this. So let's pass those records on, continue forward, But now let's add another join, and let's now bring in our wildfire data. Okay. So we're going to put that again on the right side. We're always going to think about the new data as our data that we're trying to look at. And now, as opposed to using our state data, we're going to use the data that we're left with from the tornado stuff. So we're going from, what is it, 51 records down to 22. So now what records are in the wildfire data set? I'm going to indicate that. We're going to use the same key. It's going to be the same key. And again, we only care to look at the left side. So from 22 records, now we're down to 12 records. Now here's 12 records out of 51 because we're including DC that have, in the last 10 years, haven't had a tornado fatality and haven't had a wildfire fatality. All right, last but not least, let's bring in flood. So next one is going to be join. Carry on these 12 states into our left join. Let's bring our new data set flood here. And let's just right click on our join. Again, another way to add a browse or tools at the end of this. And let's just add a left browse. Let's run our workflow after we join our state there. So it's just, again, the same key here. We're just seeing if both sides have the same state and we're passing those through. And are there any states that don't have any of these fatalities? There are 3: Delaware, DC, and New Hampshire. So that matches our result, and it looks like that's going to be maybe some good spots to post up if you want to go live in Delaware, New Hampshire, DC, and avoid natural disasters from the environment, anyways. Okay, so moving on to the union tool. So we have 130 right now. The union tool, we're going to make that a quick one. We'll keep the same practice on there. You do have the practice problem on there. What I do want to show you is if you have a union on your canvas, what you can do is you can click and drag each wire to the union tool here. And what that's going to do is stack that data on top of itself. So as opposed to a join building out to the right and enriching your data, a union tool is building your data set down. So it's stacking data on top of itself, okay? So we'll see that this indicator here is not green. That's because it can intake multiple streams into the same tool. So you'll see down here in the results window, we actually have 1, 2, 3, 4 data sets coming into our union, okay? Then if we want to see what that final data set looks like, we can go see the output anchor of our union. So again, there's what's coming in and then what's coming out. So you'll notice these new fields are here because every data set didn't have either one of those columns. Only certain rows here have certain columns there. So you'll see tornado fatalities are all the way down there, then wildfire, and then flood. So there's a better way to format that, but in general, that's how the union works. You can stack data on top of itself. So if we wanted to, we can delete those wires. And another way, final way, and then we'll move on to the next tool. If you had a bunch of these inputs on here, as opposed to clicking every single one and dragging it over, what you can do is have those selected, okay? Right click on them, and you can say, if I can find it, view possible connections, okay? You can also click on the union and say view possible connections. Let's just look at that one more time here. So if I right click on a tool, there's going to be some options. For union, I'm going to say view possible options. And here I can say everything that I want to go into my union tool over here. Let's just go and select those and press connect. So I go, oh, it's going to go the other, I messed up. So if we go the other way, hold on. State, let's go to tornado, do tornado, wildfire, and flood. View possible connections. Let's go forward to see what our connection is in the input. And right here, if I just check that, and then I press OK, or connect, it'll build that wire there. So you don't have to click and drag it every single time. So that's the union tool. Create that left join. It's just as simple as saying, not only do I want my left results that match, I also want everything that came out of my original data set, the left side of my data set, to be there. So that when I click on my browse, when I click on my union results, I'll still have my 51 records, right? but only some of them are going to be populated with tornado fatalities, which we can see here based on the fact that that's yellow. That's indicating that around 50% of the records are null. Okay, that's a quick data quality indicator of that value field, and that's just because of the union. So that's a left outer join is what we just created there. Okay, check the chat real quick here. Any questions? Cool. I think we're good. So I'm going to move on to our next practice problem. I do want to save the last 10 minutes or so just to talk about community and stuff. So I'll try to track it here. But let's move on to find and replace. Find and replace is pretty straightforward. I'll include these in the practice problems and the solutions. It basically says find a character or find a certain set of characters and replace it with another character. It's just another join one. It's useful, it's cool, but I do want to make sure we get to parsing and transforming your data. So let's check out date time parsing first, shall we? Okay, now that that's loaded, let's check out what the problem is. In this practice, your goal is to take a string formatted, a string type data type, formatted string, and convert it to a date. After that, convert it into another date string formatted a different way. So we're ingesting something into a date so that we can output it as a nice new string data type. Okay, we can do that. So let's do that. First, let's always click that run button, or better yet, click on that Control R. And we're going to go to, we're not seeing this in our favorites, right? We know it's parsing, so we're going to go to our parse column type there. Okay, we're going to click on that, and let's just drag date time onto our canvas. And let's connect our input data. Let's take a peek at what our input data looks like. We can either check out it here in the results window, or if we need to profile it and see kind of how it's going on from a data quality standpoint, we can of course just take a peek at our new browse configuration as of 2020.1 version here and see how that's looking. Looking pretty good. So first question, or first ask of us as Alteryx developers, take the string date that's formatted like that and convert it into a date. So we know it's a string because of this drop down. There's only actually one string data type in our data set, and I know this because if I click on this drop down, it's going to give me every single string data type that's in my data set. Since there's only one, we only see one. So we can keep that populated there, and then the next step is what it's going to do is going to try to rename our data type. So as opposed to overwriting what we already have, it's going to say, hey, this is what came in from a date time standpoint, and they're naming it, this is what came out of it, right? That makes sense. They did do a pretty good job up here on the canvas of giving what the format is. I don't see this MMMDDYYY format here. So instead I can go to this custom option that's down here, right? And I can actually indicate how my data is coming in from a string type so that Alteryx can convert it into a date. So if I go to, let's see, first let's just look at it too. It's like, let's go to here. It's month, day, and then year. So pretty close to that. So let's go to, if we go to month, let's go to here. Month, day, year. We can just type in that like this. So it's a capital M, it's a capital first letter of whatever month it is. And then we have our day. That's just going to be, if you write Excel formulas or if you write some Tableau in the past, it'll look like that. And then you'll notice also down here in the example, what's coming in. So we can check to see if that's what matches our actual result over here, which it does. And then we're seeing what goes in is January 2 from a string standpoint. What comes out of it is that nice date looking thing, US date formatted. So you see that 01 as January and then that 2 as January 2nd. So we'll run that. We'll see if we get any errors. Looking good. And you'll see that our output anchor will see our nice fresh new date come out of there, formatted in the correct date format. But we're not done yet because they also asked us to, now that we have a date, we want to format it into a different string type. So we're going to say, go check out my dates here. Oh, I have to connect the tool first. go check out my dates here. So again, here's my string that we made or that we knew before, and then here's our string that we made. Here's our date time out. So we can call this like date time out string or something like that. And our configuration is going to be, what they say here, YYY. So we're going to just copy whatever they have. Capital Y's, MMTD. So we can see that here's what's going in and here's our output. That's probably not what your end user wants to see. They don't care about the Y's and the D's. They want to see the actual dates. So we're not going to copy this. We're not going to copy what our user actually indicated here. We're going to be better analysts than that, and we're going to assume that they meant something like this. So let's go and say date string, and there is the requested format. Got your year, got your month, and you got your day based on what they wanted. That's parsing dates. Any questions with that? I'm going to look at the chat as I load a text to column parsing, which is super fun. So I'm going to load that one up and go check the chat here. Cool. Looking good? So let's go back to our text to column practice here. And I'll keep checking back at the chat too, in case someone has something in there. But I will zoom in here and we'll check out what we have going on. So what's our ask in this one? As we know in Excel, we have to delimit our data a lot. We have to separate a lot of times one column into multiple. And in this practice, our goal is to split a given field into components using the text to columns tool. Notice, however, that the delimiter isn't the same across the board. So we might run into that in real life too, right? You might have some stuff that might be a space that's delimiting certain data, or you might have something that's like a comma or a slash or a dash or something like that. So let's take a peek at what these what this input data starts out to be, which is just one column of a bunch of football teams, not really telling us too much what's going on yet. So let's see what the ask is. Target data. Looks like we're trying to separate the season, team, conference, division, and the wins and losses, so that maybe we can help out our fantasy football team with some reporting or something, right? So I already know that I'm going to be using my text to columns tool here. And let's take a peek at what the data looks like so that we can see what we want to delimit it by. So I see commas in there and I see dashes. So I see dashes in there because we're also trying to separate out the record, right? So we don't want wins, losses, ties also in something. So we also want to separate that out. So let's do that. Let's go and say, what's our first field here? Our field 1. No, it's not a field name yet, which is fine. So we're delimiting the only field that we have available to us with commas. So we have year, team, conference, division, and then the record. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 4 spots to start out with. And that's delimited by a comma. So let's put a comma in there and let's say, give me a resulting 4 columns. And let's run it and see what we get. What goes in, this. What comes out, this. So we're getting close. Looks like we want one more comma delimiter, and then we need to start worrying about that record, that wins, losses, and ties. So not only will I increase it by 1 more, I'll add 3 more columns for my record, and then I'm also going to go back up to my delimiter over here. I'm going to add another character in there, okay? So the first one was my comma here. The second one is my dash, if you can see that. So first one's a comma, second one's a dash. Let's run it, and hopefully this tool will utilize both those characters to delimit my data. And let's see if I did not save it. So there we go. I was playing around with my zoom it, and I didn't actually configure the tool. So now let's take a peek at it. Looking pretty good. Here's my original column. Year, team, conference, division, win, loss, tie. So we have an extra column, no worries. Just go over to the configuration over here, bring it down to 7. And then last but not least, let's actually make this usable for our fantasy football league here.
And instead of saying field 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right at the top here, 1, 2, 3, that's just saying what field number that is. Let's rename that to something more usable. So I'm going to deselect my original data so we don't see that pass through. And it was, I think, year, team, conference, division, win, loss, tie. All right, let's do our Control-Shift-B, add a browse to the end of that select tool now that we've cleaned it up even a little bit more. And now we have a very usable data set. If we click on it here, go check it out over here. And here's a nice little profile. Looks like the top team, looks like 7 teams. Let's see what we got here. Top values, looks like most teams, 7 of them had 6 wins. So here's your data profiler. Going to work over here. Cool. You can also see link stats. Yeah, we don't have to go into that too much, but okay. That's text to columns parsing. Let's see if there's any questions from the last activity or anything new. Cool, doesn't appear so. All right, moving along. Let's go to, check our time, we got 1:44. Let's move on to our last practice problem, which will be to transpose. Crosstabs very similar, just again the inverse of transpose. But I think you're going to be utilizing transpose more than crosstab, and we only have so much time, so I will include the practice and solution problems in the follow-up in the description if we have enough people to subscribe to the channel after this. All right, let's click the Control-R button to run the workflow. Here's our input data. This should look pretty familiar if you've ever analyzed anything in Excel. Good old crosstab report. So we have our dimensional data, in this case our loan data, A, B, C, D, E, and then across we have our values of that data in a column format separated by month. Okay, so maybe it's useful to analyze in Excel, maybe not that useful to actually visualize or work with beyond that tool. So what do we want to do? For the most part, what we want to do is you want to keep that loan data and then repeat it as many times down as there is that many dates across. And to do that, we need to utilize the transpose tool. So let's go over to, we could go to our favorites. A lot of times people like this tool in their favorites. I haven't added it yet. To do that, all I would have to do is hover over my tool and click on that star button, and then it'd be on my favorites. I'm just going to keep it there into my transform area, and I'll now bring it down to the canvas. First things first, as usual, we have to connect the two tools, and then from there, let's take a look to the left-hand side and see what how we want to configure the transpose tool. So you'll notice all the data columns are checked. Every time that we check a key column over here, you'll see the data column become unchecked. So think of everything like right here that you want to be in rows now, and everything that you want it to be grouped by. And that's pretty much it. You can check out the missing columns data and what to do when that happens. You can either error the workflow, you can warn. Maybe you expect it to have some missing columns, so maybe you just want to ignore it all together. But for us, we can go here, check to see if there's any other data columns that we want to keep, maybe because of their dimension and nature. Otherwise, let's just go ahead, click Control-R, and run our workflow. So we went from 5 records to 170 records to transpose that data in 0.7 seconds. So that activity is going to take people a lot of time, I think, probably to do in Excel. Pretty fast here. So a couple other activity that we want to do here is it'll default to say name and value after your transpose tool is configured. We don't want to name it that. We want to make it a little easier for our end user to use this data. So instead, let's again drop the select field on there and utilize the renaming function. So I'll just say, yeah, loan date. I think it was loan date. And then value is going to be an amount. Or if it's a loan, it'll be probably your principal, right? So let's do principal. I didn't see the interest data on there. So just view results. Let's do my Control-Shift-B, add my browse, run the workflow, and now we can see a nice usable data set ready to visualize for your end user. Flip side, again, as we launch it here, is just going to be your crosstab report. We have a couple minutes. Let's chat about it. It's going to be putting the practice problem onto the canvas. And then as opposed to having stuff long, sometimes we want to distribute a bunch of reporting. So we want to make a crosstab report for people to easier adjust that. So we can say, we go to control run. We have what our current data set looks like here, these 64 records. Looks familiar. Here's the data set that we created for our fantasy football team. And now we want to see who is the most improved between the first and second seasons. Now we're actually answering some analytical questions, right? Our goal is to calculate which teams are the most improved. So we already know we're going to do the crosstab report. It makes sense because we do want to ditch some of this stuff. So let's go to crosstab. I'm going to just bring that right down into the canvas here. Connect it to my input tool. Again, using that data that we just created using our text to columns. And let's configure that. So let's go into the crosstab configuration here. You see that red indicator indicating that it's not yet ready to go. And they want to see which team was the most improved. So let's do this. Most improved would be considered wins, right? And we want to aggregate that numeric value, that sum of wins by team, right? And probably by, yeah, let's do that. Season, yeah. Let's run that, see how that looks. You can always run it, see what you get, and then go from there. So right here we have Arizona Cardinals 8-3, but what we don't have is the most improved yet. So we can sort it and maybe look at it that way, but we don't want to do that. Let's make it easier on us. Let's make it easier on our user, and let's just make a calculation with the formula tool that we learned about earlier. So calculate the change in wins between seasons. So because we want to see it be positive if they improve or negative if they don't, we would want to say 2018, the later year. Oops, add column. Let's go to improvement. And let's calculate 2018 minus 2017. And we do see a preview there because we have run the workflow, which is super helpful. And again, let's make it a correct data type whenever we can. And then we'll see our improvement. So we still don't know who is our improved. We could sort it, but again, we're just going to kind of push this out to our users. We don't want to have them have to do any formatting. Let's do that for them. So let's sort improvement, descending order. So the highest improvement is going to be on top, and then run our workflow. And looks like, unfortunately, the Chicago Bears improved the most in 2018. I'm not sure that's the case in the last couple seasons, or last season, but there you go. So that's that. With the last 8 minutes, what I want to do is have you all of you viewers, if you have something out there that you want to see from a live standpoint or some free training that we'll do again via live stream with better microphone performance and better startup goals, drop it in the chat. I know a lot of times spatial is a popular one, or maybe creating an API to something, maybe with a Google API, or perhaps maybe you're a really heavy Excel user and you want to know, as an Excel power user, I use VBA, Power Query. How can I utilize those types of skills to automate my work further? We can spend an entire hour or 2.5 hours or whatever you want on topics like that. Just drop it in the chat, let me know, or a comment on the video if you're watching this later. Cool. So from there, I'm going to leave the kind of overview and practice problems at that. I'll drop the practice problems and solutions in the description for people to download later. But one thing I do want to call out is a big part of the Alteryx tool in general is the community. So any kind of problems that you run into out in Alteryx Designer or Server, or maybe trying to scale up quickly or something, a lot of times you're going to be able to navigate to community.alteryx.com, and you can find your answers out there. So if you run into something like a workflow that you're not able to figure out or something like that, you can navigate out to here. It's also a good spot to, let me actually go to it here, community.alteryx.com. It's also a good place to start if you want to download some practice problems, if you want to maybe go do those weekly challenges that I mentioned earlier. It's also a nice place to go get your certification. So if you're interested in something like that, if you want me to run through some good tips on maybe what to study for at a broad standpoint, we can cover some of those concepts and maybe talk about testing techniques. It's also a great place to find user groups and also like-minded other people from an industry standpoint. So if you're trying to solve some supply chain analytic problems, you're going to be able to find some Alteryx users out there that are in the supply chain world that are doing this every single day. So here it is. Highly, highly recommend creating a user login name here. Go say hi to me if you find me. But in general, you got this big search bar, right? This is going to be your Google for your Alteryx stuff. One thing to note is this search bar up here in your designer also looks at the Alteryx community for answers. So they're super integrated and it's really useful. But to get the most value out of it, create a username and go check out some of these things like designer knowledge. So here you're going to be able to find stuff like tool mastery. You're going to be able to go into designer discussions about things. Alteryx Academy, there's some, that's where you can go find those weekly challenges. That's where you go get your certifications. There's a couple of interactive lessons there and learning paths as well. Right here is going to be your user group. And if you're in the Twin Cities, come reach out to me. As one of the leaders of the Alteryx user group. We can hang out virtually sometime once we have virtual meeting here in the next month or two. Also, you can, if you're anywhere, it's global by city sometimes, but definitely by state and country. Go find your Alteryx people out here in the community. With that, we're at 5 minutes, pretty much time. I'm going to hang out for another 5 minutes in case there's any other questions or in case anyone wants to pop by. But otherwise, thanks for joining. Sorry for the technical issues at the beginning. We'll get that sorted out, and we'll get some nice microphone quality for the next stream, and maybe even some better webcam quality too. And I'll make sure to go get Cosmo because I promised people that he'd be in the stream too. Cosmo was snoozing during this entire thing. Hopefully I didn't put anyone else to sleep while chat. But I'll check the chat now and hang out. Cool, you got it, Joel. Thanks for hanging out. Appreciate you stopping by. Let's see if we got anything else here. I guess we select first only the state. Yep. And then anything I would change? There's a question. Anything I would change / don't like about Alteryx? Off topic. What software do you use for live streaming? So a couple things. So good call there. There are of course things that we don't like about Alteryx. As an Alteryx ace, there's about 30 or 40 of us worldwide that we're their biggest proponents, and we love the tool a lot. We're also their biggest critiquers. So we have the most feedback between our group. And there's a little more vocal people than some others in that crew. But what you can do when you don't like something is go out to ideas out here on community. So let's just jump into Alteryx ideas. And that's going to be a great spot because you can sort it basically by likes about what people want the most out of the product today that they don't have right now. For example, one of the things that always kind of grinds my gears up here is if I have a bunch of Alteryx workflows that I have open, I need to be very careful, try to open up this one to the left here, versus up here they have this really cool thing where if I have, I can use my scroll bar and scroll around like that, kind of like how you can in certain other applications. But I put the idea out there on community saying I want that functionality here too, down here on these tabs. And that just recently got accepted as an idea, so they're improving the product. That said, I think it'd be really cool if there was a browser version of Alteryx released. I think there's a lot of tools out there that are ahead of the game in that sense. I like to see that because that would make it, of course, machine agnostic too. That would be a really fun thing. So there's a couple ideas. Server, there's a lot of for Alteryx Server and Gallery. It's such a powerful tool, and it's a great way to collaborate with people in terms of sharing analytical applications, sharing macros and workflows, and everything else like that. But there are some, from a server administration standpoint, there are some items that would improve the product, and they're actually addressing that through what's called server.next. So that would be the next release of Alteryx Server. Really looking forward to that. So that would be something that I think could be improved right now that they're addressing, but still not here yet. So looking forward to seeing more of that. It's in beta right now. Really excited about it. Let's talk about this other one. What software do I use for live streaming? So I used Streamlabs, and it was actually the first time I've ever done this before, researching the software. It was super intuitive. A lot of research went into it. And then, of course, when I was testing with my personal account and then flipped over to our company account, it kind of hit the fan right before I started. So thanks for bearing with me with that. And then I use a Yeti Blue microphone usually, but now I was having some feedback issues. So I'm going to go find some kind of audio grounder for that for the next live stream. So it won't be this kind of robotic voice. It'll be hopefully something a little nicer on that one. Error handling, predictive analytics. Error handling, predictive analytics. Any interesting case from the community would be useful in a future session. Most definitely. So there's a huge, there's a ton out there on community about error handling, and actually looking just at this here. If you go into connectors, where are we at here? Boom, boom, boom. Using my scroll bar on my mouse here. There's a bunch of different kind of tools out here that you can put onto your canvas in like the developer category, and that you can say, if there's an error, do this, or there's like a detour if something happens, trigger an event, maybe send an email to a colleague or an email to yourself that says something failed or something was successful and stuff like that. But then on the predictive side of things too, if we're talking about training a model or handling that kind of stuff, we can definitely go into that. Let's get people to maybe download that predictive package, and then we can dive into that one for another session, for a future session. Cool, you got it, Deepak. Appreciate you stopping by. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Jonathan. Jay Wolf over there. Cool. Well, I'll mute, but I'll keep checking the chat and be on for just a few more minutes, and then work to get that stuff posted in the description for the practice problems and solutions. Hey, Deepak, yeah, a couple questions. Let's see. First one, are we planning any Tableau sessions? Yeah, we actually are. So today was just something we wanted to try streaming simultaneously and see the interest in general, see how our technology worked out the first time. The other two sessions were live today. There were Tableau sessions. So one was by Luke Stanky, Tableau Zen Master, on some advanced calculations, and the other one was by Alex Christensen, who you might see out there. He also does some 2-minute tool videos with me and some of the weekly challenges with John Emery. He also did a Tableau session today. All these are going to be recorded. Probably do some light editing, especially like that intro that the audio didn't work too hot on. But in the future too, we plan on doing workout Wednesdays and also other live sessions for training, especially in the time that we're at right now, virtually. We're able to deliver that a little easier now, I think, and I think there's more appetite for that. So we'll keep going on it and then see what the reception is and see if people still want us to do it after that. I just dropped my email in there, so feel free to reach out if you'd like. If you have suggestions on future content or something that you want to see, let me know. If you want to focus on a specific use case or a specific industry or something like that, if you want to focus on supply chain analytics or transportation or something with media or marketing, something like that, finance, tax, my OG, my background there, we can absolutely do that. So just drop me a line either in this or the description comments, or feel free to email too. So I think it'd be nice if it was consolidated on the YouTube video. Yeah, so we'll call out too. Do note that we do a lot of these kind of things too, not just live. We have a couple playlists out there. One's called the 2-minute tool playlist, where myself and Alice cover one tool at a time. We're up to about 30 that in 2 minutes what a tool does. So I think that's pretty useful. That's on our Data Coach YouTube channel, so subscribe to that if you don't mind and scope out those. You can get notified of new tools every single week. We release 2, and then you'll see Luke Stanky out there doing Workout Wednesday builds a lot. He also has a bunch of stuff out there on, for example, how to create a waterfall chart, right? How to best use parameter actions in business. Then you also see Alicia, who's also at Tessellation, has a couple of Tableau 360 videos out there, which are good, high quality content. I think, they're all less than 10 minutes. Most of them are less than 10 minutes, but it covers a lot from a Tableau standpoint. And then also, again, on the flip side of it, for Alteryx, John Emery, every week almost runs through the weekly challenge now on YouTube. And he's one of the first people, I think, to always get that out there. So check that out. And we can work through maybe a weekly challenge or 2 or 3 at some point and just hang out that way. Yeah, you got it, Deepak. Thanks.